All right, we're looking at the matter of the lack the follow-up to the loss of reverence and restoring reverence with regard to the matter of authority. And in the introduction, and probably we may not get out of the introductory, matter of fact, I'm pretty sure we're not going to get out of the introductory material this morning. But with regard to the times in which we live, there are some points here that I think bear mentioning and maybe fleshing out just a little bit. It says, and speaking of times in which we live, says, we live in times where God is respected but not revered. I would qualify that statement by saying that we live in times where God is respected among religionists but not revered. In years gone by, even people who were not religious at least respected the idea of God, or respected the idea that people had faith in God, and respected the kind of lives that those individuals lived. But that is not the case anymore. We have to be pretty honest about the world in which we live, and we also have to be honest about the community in which we live, and that is the fact that we live in a very isolated place with regard to the ways of the world. Now look, it's not difficult for us to see our community starting to come apart at the seams and the problems that exist in our little part of the world, but it's still far, far better than most other places. I mean, when you start, and I'm not just talking about living in the country as opposed to the big city, because I think there's still, as a general rule, there's still the same attitudes, for example, of people who live in Huntsville and Birmingham that live in Marion County. I'm talking about when you start getting up, say, in the upper Northwest, you start getting up in the upper Northeast, in the New England states, there is just no respect for God at all, or those that believe in God, and so we don't live in that. So it's a lot more difficult for us to see it and to understand it. And so, but among religionists, that is, people who profess to be in some shape or form to be Christians, there is a respect for God to some degree, but there is not a reverence for God. And in some cases, there's not even respect for God. But I would qualify that statement, again, depending on where you live and who we might be talking about. We see people trust in the supernatural, but not the supernatural God of the Scriptures. And I've found that somewhat. The statement is dead on, but I find it incredible. If you believe in the supernatural, then what is the source of the supernatural? Because supernatural means something that is obviously outside the realm of what is knowable or can be seen, tested by the senses. So people profess to believe in the miraculous, and that, by the way, miraculous is supernatural. All right. People that believe in fate or destiny believe in the supernatural. In other words, it's beyond the scope or the realm of physical reality. But then the question must be answered, then what is the source of that? Is the universe the source of the super? In other words, is the natural universe the source of the supernatural? And there's just a gross inconsistency in that type of thinking. And so... people say, and I don't want to use the word supernatural because that's not the word they use, but they want some type of spirituality without the confines of religious authority. They want to be known as being spiritual, but not necessarily religious, because to them the idea of organized religion has a negative connotation. So, yeah, no restraint. Yeah, spirituality doesn't restrain you in the way that religious faith would restrain you, because spirituality is all about the self and not about the sovereign. Right. And then the third one is we live in a society or times where feelings outweigh faith. And that's across the board. That's among religionists and non-religionists. People make the most important decisions and take the most important actions that would impact their lives based not on any type of research or logic or reason or investigation, but the way they feel about a thing. By the way, all your news outlets now are not designed to give you facts. They're designed to invoke some type of emotional response, or to be misleading in order to evoke some type, of emotional response. Think about this. Here's your triggering phrase: kids in cages. How many times we heard that foolishness in the last 4 or 5 years? Kids in cages. All right? It's just interesting to me that kids in cages didn't become a problem until somebody else became president. We all know who built the cages, right? Now, I don't have a problem with it. When people are here illegally, you just don't let them have free run around the country. It's just a basic violation of the law, and I'm not saying people have to be mistreated, but they've got to be kept somewhere. They've got to be held somewhere. But that's a triggering phrase. It really doesn't explain the fact of the matter. It just is designed to create an emotional response or trigger some type of reaction. And so, if you sat down and started trying to talk to people about things like that and explaining what the facts are, then you just don't get very far, because I'd rather just be led about by my feelings as opposed to have to actually think and and listen and consider some things and possibly admit that my feelings are not based in fact or reality. The exact same thing goes in matters of religion. People in the religious world are being led about by their feelings. They're not being led about by faith. They're certainly not being led about by true faith, which comes by hearing God's word, Romans 10 and verse 17. And so, whatever appeals to my flesh, and we've talked extensively about this, so I'm not going to belabor the point, but but we live in a religious society that is feelings driven and not faith based. Feelings driven and not faith based. And then letter D, religious devotion. Our society, religious devotion is practiced more like a picnic than the knee knocking, heart pricking experience of Scripture. In other words, there's just a general lack of reverence, that people want to approach God in a very flippant manner. However, I would also qualify this statement, because I don't think we have to approach our worship assembly saying, like some of our Mennonite friends might, which is everybody's going to wear black. And, in other words, every worship assembly has to be approached like we're attending a funeral. And that's the way those individuals express themselves in worship. In other words, I don't want to use the word levity, but there's no gladness in the worship. There's no gladness. There can be too much. What's the word I'm looking for? There can be too much solemnness in an assembly and not enough joy, and then there can be too much joy and not enough solemnness. In other words, we've got to strike a balance between the two extremes. I don't think we need to enter into the assembly as if we're coming to a funeral, but at the same time, we don't want to enter the assembly like we're going to a picnic or a ball game. There's room for both. I mean, David said, I was glad when they said, let us go up into the house of the Lord. Psalm 122 and verse 1. Psalm 100, let us enter his courts with thanksgiving and his gates with praise. That doesn't sound like a funeral dirge to me. And so, but at the same time, David understood the need for reverence, but the idea that reverence is devoid of all joy or happiness is simply not accurate as well. And so we want to be sure that we strike a proper balance, and not one or the other, but there has to be reverence, and I think there should be joy. All right, now the second section. All right, any thoughts on that before I move into the second section? All right, it says indications of our lost reverence are all around us. All right, now we're going to spend a little bit of time right here in this one because I do not agree with John at all in this first point. Well, that's not fair. That's not fair. I have some significant disagreements. Now, it is true. It is true that biblical reverence honors God by the way that we dress. I think there's something to be said for that. I would say, first of all, I think in many cases there is too lackadaisical an attitude about our approach to dress. All right, and I'll explain a little bit more about that as we make our way through. But this particular point that he makes at the bottom of page 65, it says, in Scripture, those who approach God in worship wore the best garments. Now, the citation is Exodus 28:2 and 28:43. Now, the problem with that citation, and to try to make that point, is that those texts refer to the garments that were to be worn by Aaron and his sons. That they were the mediators. That was the high priest, and his lineage were the succession of the high priest. And by the way, Aaron's sons seem to be held in higher esteem than just a common Levite. I hate to use the word a common priest, but you understand what I mean by that. There was the high priest. It's almost like you have Aaron's sons, and then you have the Levitical priesthood in general. A priest had to be from the tribe of Levi, but the high priest had to be of the tribe of Levi and the lineage of Aaron. And so there was something special about Aaron and his descendants with regard to the high priesthood. But this scripture reference talks about a divinely mandated dress code for the high priest and his sons. To me, and I'm not saying John would say this, but I could hear somebody making this argument. Well, those were vestures for the priests, and all Christians are priests today because we're the priesthood of God, 1 Peter 2:5, 1 Peter 2:9. So therefore, we need to do like they did, except for the fact you can't find anything in the New Testament remotely akin to that. In other words, that is a false connection. In other words, that just because Aaron and his sons and the priests wore priestly garments in the Old Testament and Christians are priests in the New Testament is not sufficient to say that we have to dress to our very best every time we enter into the presence of God. It's a bad argument, and this is a bad argument. You cannot define or try to impose a dress code on Christians based on the dress code of Aaron and his sons. It's just not a good argument. In Exodus 19 and verse 10, this is not in your book, all right? And by the way, I just made the note here. I drew a line under the bottom page 65. 28:2 and 28:43 says, "This is Aaron and his sons, and not the people, and not the people." But I also wrote Exodus 19 and verse 10. Because as Moses prepared to go up into the mountain to receive the 10 Commandments, God told his people to prepare themselves over the course of 3 days. Not because they were going up on the mountain, but because Moses was, and he was going to bring them the law of God. But they had to prepare themselves to receive the law of God. And there is only one admonition and command given to the people in Exodus 19 and verse 10. Has anybody turned there? Has anybody turned there to look at it? 19, I said 19:1, 19:10. Exodus 19:10. What's it say, Dwayne?
Then the Lord said to Moses, go to the people and consecrate them today and tomorrow, and let them wash their clothes.
Wash their clothes. That's all that was said. Wash their clothes. They've been wandering in the wilderness, which, by the way, if you remember from the various texts, God said, you're still wearing the same clothes you wore 40 years ago. In other words, I didn't allow your clothes to wear out. I didn't allow your sandals to wear out. In other words, they wore the same. Ladies, how you like that? Wear the same clothes and the same shoes for 40 years. It must stay the same size. All that walking kept them nice and trim. But the point of the matter was that there was nothing special about their garments. God said, wash your clothes. Or just be prepared. I remember talking to a friend of mine, a fellow preacher, and he was talking about a couple of the members that were there that didn't have a lot where he was preaching at that time, that didn't have a lot with regard to this world's goods, but they didn't make any personal preparation to come to worship. I mean, they might have worked outside all day Saturday and went to bed without a bath or a shower, and then maybe put on the same clothes and come to church Sunday. And he said, look, I'm not saying you got to wear a tuxedo. He says, but soap and water are cheap. Soap and water is cheap. And the point was, make some preparation. Make some preparation. Not that you have to go out and buy the best stuff, but you need to at least be clean. Be clean. Yeah.
Well, the idea, what comes to my mind is you're coming in the presence of God, make yourself presentable.
Yeah, be presentable. Yeah. You did say be fancy or wash your clothes. Now look. If you had to work all day, let me just give you an exception to this. If you had to work all day on Wednesday or whatever, or you had to work all day on Sunday afternoon for some reason, and it came time for worship, I'd rather you be here straight out of work as not be here, right? And if you think you smell that bad, you can sit back there in the nursery, or you can sit over here because nobody uses this pew over here. In other words, I want you here. Don't use the fact that I just got off. I got off work and I was nasty. Don't use that as an excuse. I'd rather have you here. All right. But when you have opportunity, Exodus 19:10 says, "Look, just wash your clothes and just come and be clean. Just come and be clean." And so, that's the only thing you'll find, I think, in regard to the common man, in reference to preparing to enter into the presence of God. Now, top of page 66. Top of page 66. In the second, the second paragraph says, "It was common to hear mothers instruct their children, go change, we're going to worship. You know better than to wear that. Wear your best for the Lord." I heard that all my life. And look, I wear a suit and tie just because that's the way I was raised. When I went to my family reunion for years and years, and I was the only preacher in the family, and I preached on Sunday, and we met in a block building that did not have air conditioning in the first Sunday of August. And I preached in a coat and tie every single Sunday. Every Sunday at reunion. It didn't matter if it was 100 degrees, I preached in a coat and tie. Now look, I learned better. But it was just something that was instilled in me that if I was going to preach, I was going to wear coat and tie. As a general rule, not as a general rule, you're going to see me in a coat and tie on every Sunday. Maybe not on Sunday night, but I'm going to have a jacket on. I might not have a tie on, but most time I do. But that's just the way I was raised, and that's the way I feel comfortable. And I don't think anybody is offended by the fact that I wear a coat and tie on Sunday or on Sunday night. But I'll tell you this, if it became a problem, I wouldn't wear one. I wouldn't wear one. Because I don't want anything that I wear to make anybody feel disadvantaged or uncomfortable. And when we go to Ghana, I always wore khaki pants and some type of Ghanaian shirt. Number one, it's comfortable. Number two, it's hot. And number three, it makes those guys comfortable to see me wearing something that they've given me as a gift or something. In other words, they realize I'm trying to be like you, and they appreciate that. And so, there's that. I remember this when I first went to East Wood Street in Paris. Of course, I was a youth minister there, and of course, I was a song leader Sunday morning, Sunday night, so I always wore a coat and tie Sunday morning, Sunday night. But on Wednesday night, I'd wear khakis and a button-up or khakis and a polo or something, and some of the old ladies didn't like it. They didn't like it. And so the elders were asking me about it. And I said, here's what it boils down to. I said, I don't wear a coat and tie on Sunday night because I'm teaching the high school class, and I've got, 30 high school kids in there. I said, they just seem to relate better to me if I'm wearing khakis and a pullover like they are instead of wearing a coat and tie. I said, and I'm pretty sure the whole purpose of me being there is to try to teach those kids. And you know what the elder said? Then you wear whatever you want. They understood. They understood what the point of Wednesday night Bible class was. And so, the idea of that you have to wear your best on Sunday is just not grounded in Scripture. It's not grounded in Scripture. In fact, Sunday dress has as its origins societal division. All up until about the 19th century and the advent of the Industrial Revolution, there was no middle class for the most part. It was the upper class, which was a select few, and then basically everybody else who's living hand to mouth, farmers, whatnot, that are just making out an existence. And in England, in particular, there was an emphasis of the upper crust to wear their finest clothes on Sunday morning for the express purpose of setting themselves apart from the rest of the people. That's where Sunday dress found its origin. And then it became worse because with the advent of the Industrial Revolution became the vast expansion of the middle class. Actually, almost the creation of a middle class. And then most people, instead of being in the lower class, most people were in the middle class. And then the people in the middle class are trying to keep up with the people in the upper class. And this thing just snowballed, basically into what we see today that where Sunday just seems to be some type of fashion parade. And it's just not. First of all, it's not biblical, and secondly, I'd say it's anti-biblical. It's anti-biblical. I would never want anyone to think they couldn't come into this assembly because they didn't have anything good enough to wear. And yet, let me ask you a question. Do you think that over the last 100 years that thought has entered the mind of untold millions of people? When they see the people walking in, and they see what they wear, they see what they drive, they see the houses that they live in, and they think, man, I'm not walking in there dressed like this. That'd be embarrassing. We have inadvertently, I don't think anybody, and here's the thing, whereas the origins were designed to set apart the haves from the have-nots, I don't think any of us have ever intended that, because we were all raised to what? Wear your Sunday clothes. I had a suit when I was a kid. It only got worn on Sunday. And the worst part was, it's the only suit I had, and then when I go out and play in the churchyard and get grass stains on it, I get my tail tore up. But we were raised in a generation to give your best, to do your best for the Lord. And here's another terrible argument. Well, you wouldn't dress like that if you were going to see the president. You wouldn't dress like that if you were going to see the governor. Well, maybe or maybe not. What's the point of the meeting? If I was going, you see what I'm saying? But we all heard those things growing up, right? You wouldn't wear blue jeans to go meet the president, but you'll wear them to church. You think the president's more important than God. All type of foolish arguments like that. It's just ridiculous. It's just ridiculous. It's not a good argument.
I just think we've gone through where we get. I think maybe he's pointing out where we've gotten lax.
Oh yeah.
On what we dress. Because I have to fight with the kids. They want to wear shorter shorts than they wear at school. And I said, you're not going to church wearing something that's shorter that you can't even wear to school.
Yeah, it violates even the school code.
Right.
Yeah, and I agree with that, Lisa.
Well, and then also, I've gone to church where, all women wore dresses. And then because of the energy crisis, and we had this cut back on the heat, we started wearing pants, or that was a necessity. Always wore long dresses to be warmer.
Right.
And then I've gone to churches where all men wore suits and ties on Sunday morning. It was just a tradition.
Right.
So I think we go in waves, but we're not supposed to adorn ourselves to be showing and to show our status.
Right.
But I think we've gotten to a point where we got just lax and more lax.
And there's some truth, and there's a lot of truth. What you said is exactly right. Back when I used to get about 20, back really not that many years ago, all churches used to mail out their bulletins. Man, I used to get bulletins from all over the country. I enjoyed that. But there were a lot of bulletins that requested that any man going to wait on the Lord's table need to wear a coat and tie. And I'm like, you can't do that. You can't do that. I remember a time when I was going to speak somewhere. And those of y'all know, everybody here knows Jeffrey. You know that kid could sing from the time he was 4 years old. I mean, he was a good song leader from the time he was a little kid. And beforehand, someone had requested that Jeffrey lead a song at some place I was going to preach. Wasn't even in the state of Alabama, somewhere else. Well, Jeffrey had on a pair of shorts that was about knee length. It was in August or July or something. Had a pair of long shorts and a knit pullover shirt, polo type shirt. When he got there, they wouldn't let him lead because he had on shorts. He had on shorts, and that's our policy. We don't let anybody serve publicly.
So your appearance is greater than.
That's exactly right. Yeah, your appearance means more than your ability.
And I'll tell you something. I've been in a room full of men, and the smartest guy in that room had a 5th grade education.
Right.
And I'm serious. He was the only one who could tell.
Yeah, I mean, but we've created it, and I'm gonna go back to what Lisa said.
And then also, you don't do things because you might offend someone, depending on where you go. Where I go to church in Auburn, most of the women still on Sunday morning wear
dress.
And so you know that, and you don't want to offend them.
So you take a dress.
So you take a dress. I mean, it's just common courtesy to others. Not that you're doing anything wrong, they're doing anything wrong, or you could be doing anything wrong wearing pants.
Right.
It's just you don't want to offend someone.
Well, when you look at what the Bible has to say about dress, the New Testament specifically, it says don't overdress. We take the passages that the New Testament gives us with regard to modesty, and we apply them to too little dress, when both texts expressly are forbidding too much dress. Not that you're wearing too many clothes, but the type of clothes that are being worn are those that draw attention to the wearer. at that time, what, the gold, the braided hair, the fine clothing. It didn't have anything to do with women not wearing enough, because that was never a problem in the first century among Christians. It was about dressing in such a way as to draw attention to yourself as a person of means. So you have 1 Timothy 2, you have 1 Peter 3 in that respect, and so when the Bible talks about modesty, it's talking about being dressed appropriately, so as to not draw attention to ourselves. James chapter 2 speaks to this, not in regard to women, but in regard to men. It said, you disrespect the poor man, and you show respect to the rich man. The rich man walks into your assembly, and here's how he's described: wearing fine clothing. In other words, he's wearing clothing that obviously says he is a person of means. And then the poor man walks in, and he's identified how? By the exact same measure. He's a man not of means. And what does James say? You sin when you tell the man that has the fine clothing, you sit up here at the head of the table, and you tell the poor man, go down here and sit at the foot of the table. And then in an interesting twist, he says, which one of these two guys is most likely to carry you to court and sue you? And the question is rhetorical. It says it's the rich man. The rich man's going to be the guy that abuses you, not the poor man. And so I just got a real. I guess the older I get, the more I have a problem with this. The way that this idea of dressing for worship has been presented. Now, let me go to what Lisa said, talking about the lackadaisical attitude. I don't agree with that either. And what I find interesting is that in a lot of the urban churches, and the ones that build the 15, and they want to build a building that costs $20 million, but they want to wear cargo shorts and flip-flops. The elders or whatever. We're going to wear shorts and flip-flops. We want our building to say, hey, we're all about the very best. But then we're going to fill it full of people who haven't given 5 seconds thought about presenting themselves to the Lord. Have you ever considered just how contradictory that is? We're going to spend tens of millions of dollars on a church building, but then we're not, because only the best for us. And then, but we're going to treat it as if it's nothing more than some type of after-work social gathering. There's just a gross inconsistency when I think about that. And I spent some time, by the way, I spent a lot of time this week reading the writings of the Ante-Nicene Fathers and what they had to say about dress. And with regard to the modesty side of not wearing enough, the only thing that was said that I recall reading is that not even a woman's foot should be visible to one who's standing nearby. That no part of the woman was to be visible. And look, I'm not saying that's the rule for us. What I'm saying is that was the attitude then. That there was very little said about wearing too little, and in this case, it was allowing your foot to be seen. But there was a whole lot said about wearing too much. I got to tell you this, man, I don't remember how long ago this was, but there was on Johnny Carson one time, there was a man, he was 90-something years old, just some average guy. It wasn't anything special about him, except he was 90-something years old, and Johnny decided to have him on the show. And Johnny was asking him, said, what's some of the biggest changes you've seen in your life? Of course, he broke them all up. He said, well, the first thing is electricity. I can remember getting electricity, and everybody just thought that was the funniest thing because nobody there had ever lived without electricity. And Johnny said, well, when you were a boy, he said, what did you do for fun? He said, well, he said when it would rain, if it would rain, we'd go to town. And we'd go to the stagecoach where the coach station was, or the bus station, and we'd stand around near the mud puddles. Because the ladies would have to, he said, because the ladies would have to lift their skirt to get over the mud puddles, and said we could see their feet and ankles. It just slayed them, you know. But it shows you even within 100 years, it shows you even within 100 years how, you know, how much things have changed, you know, in regard to, and reading that about the Ante-Nicenes, or from the Ante-Nicenes reminded me of that old man on Carson years and years ago. But you know, I'll tell you what, I always like Ronnie Miller at the Hamilton High School. I like Mr. Miller, and it was the first time I remember going to an orientation. And he was talking about, you know, they had the code book and how everybody was supposed to do this or that. And he was talking about the dress code and whatnot. And he'd just say, look, just do what's right. You know, so you don't have to get caught up in all the minutia. You know, you don't have to get caught up in all the minutia. In other words, the code book has to have the minutia because somebody's always going to try to circumvent it. He goes, just do good. Just do right, and you won't have to worry about it. You know, you don't even have to worry about this thing if you'll just do right. And I think the same thing applies to our attitude toward our worship assemblies and the dress. Look, just do right. Just do right. You know, just you know, be modest. You know, and someone says, be modest and blend in. Be modest and blend in. All right. All right. I'm going to stop right there because the section on speech bears some work. So, yeah, next Sunday morning it'll be 8:15. 8:15. By the way, I don't think I put it in the bulletin, but just a reminder. Next Sunday night is the third Sunday night, and we'll have our singing and fellowship afterward in the fellowship building. So, and I'll make mention of that again when I have the announcements this morning. But I wanted to, when I saw 8:15, it reminded me that next Sunday is the third Sunday. So.